I don't have a script for this, I'm just gonna go for it. Hi, I'm Mo, and welcome to the Estranged Club. In this video, I will be trauma dumping. In this video, I'm going to be sharing my story as to why I am completely estranged from my immediate family and some of my extended family. So, I didn't have the best childhood. I mean, a lot of people don't though, so that's not exactly why I left my family. But I think it was the accumulation of all these little things leading up to a big thing, and then another big thing, and another big thing, and well, now I'm here. Yeah, I feel like before I get into the story that there should be a little bit of a trigger warning. I am going to be talking a lot about abuse. If this is something that's triggering for you, just stop watching. You know, take care of yourself. I'm hoping that by sharing my story, I'll be able to strike a chord with someone who was in my position and can see that now I'm living a really good life and could maybe take steps to find that sort of happiness for themselves. Okay, so let's get into it. From the ages of turns out talking about your trauma is very hard. Okay, full story. It was a Saturday night. My family was watching Lord of the Rings, and my whole family, myself included, kind of fell asleep. It was really late in the night, I think around 3 a.m. when I started feeling these hands on me, and they were big hands. And mind you, in a family of 5, I've got myself, my youngest brother, my middle brother, and we're all 4 years apart, so they were very young, very small. I've got my mom, and I got my dad, and these were big hands, and I had no idea what was going on. I was just frozen, terrified, and I just kept wishing that it would stop. And eventually it did, and that's when my dad woke us up because he thought I was asleep, and I just, kissed my parents goodnight like I usually did and went to bed. And I messaged my friend who told me that I probably dreamt it up, and I was really hoping that I did. And I messaged, at the time, my girlfriend, and she told her mom. And the next morning at church, there was a plan that in the middle of church, I would go to the bathroom and then sit with my partner's family rather than my family. So when I did that, I took my youngest brother with me, and nobody knew what was going on. My parents were just so confused why I decided to sit with my partner's family. So eventually something happened that got us outside of the church. And I'm crying so much, and I'm telling my mom that Dad touched me, and she was just like, what? And my dad's like, no, I would never. And then he made us go home, so we drove back home, and I was lying on this couch, and my dad was insisting that he didn't touch me. Like, why would he touch me? He's got my mom. It was really gross now to think about it. I'm 16, and he's telling me that, like, what? You don't think your mother satisfies me? Those were his exact words. And I was just like, ugh. Anyway, they gaslit me into thinking that I had the most vivid dream of my life. I was 16 and I didn't want to believe that it was true. I decided, okay, yeah, I must be crazy. I must have dreamt it all up. And at the time I was quite religious, and my dad was suggesting that there was probably a demon in the house that did it, because we didn't bless the house when we moved in. And so I was scared, very scared that there actually was a demon in the house. I spent the next 3 years convincing myself that it wasn't real, that it was just a dream, that it was sleep paralysis. I think I went down a rabbit hole of telling myself it was sleep paralysis and looking at all these different videos about sleep paralysis. And then I'm 19 now, and I'm sleeping in my brother's room because he's got a bunk bed and my room is being painted. So I've taken the bottom bunk and he's taken the top bunk, and I feel it again. I feel the hands again. And this time I'm telling myself, I need to open my eyes. I'm going to open my eyes because this is not a dream. And so I wait for the hands to stop, and they get up, and I open my eyes as my dad's walking out the door, and all I felt in that moment was relief, strangely. Relief that I wasn't crazy, that I really was gaslit. It was like a weirdly validating experience. Like, it was horrifically violating, obviously. Like, I was still disgusted, but I was just mostly relieved that I wasn't nuts. I was at the University of Miami. I was a freshman, and it was time for me to go to school. So I get ready, and I decide to go straight to the counseling center because I needed to talk to someone. I didn't know what to do. I wasn't sure what the steps were. Like, I have this information and I just needed to word vomit. So I go to the counseling center, and I tell the counselor, you know, what I experienced and how I thought it was a dream, and then it turned out it wasn't a dream. What do I do? And apparently it's a law in Florida that if there are minors in the house when the sex crimes are reported, then it has to be reported to CPS, Child Protective Services. I'm here freaking out because I'm like, no, I don't want any trouble. But they're like, it's out of our hands. There's nothing we can do. So they reported it to CPS, and my uni put me in emergency housing for a week. Honestly, it was so relieving to be away for that week. CPS goes over to interview my family, talk about what was reported, and my middle brother calls me. He's telling me that I'm practically ruining their lives because my dad's the only one that brings money into the family. My mom is a housewife. Like, consider us, you know, you're ruining our finances, essentially. And my mom was like sobbing on the phone and all that, and it just felt so overwhelming, like I caused all this pain to my family. But I remember I asked my brothers if anything had happened to them, and they told me no, nothing happened. And so I felt all this weight, all this pressure that, you know, everything was just on me. I was the only victim in this situation. Like, maybe what happened to me isn't worth the whole demise of my family. Eventually the emergency housing runs out and I have to go back home. And when I get home, my parents sit me down, and my dad admits to what had happened when I was 16, but claims that the thing that I had recently experienced at 19 didn't actually happen. That didn't really make sense. And he was all like, your mom knows, and we talked about it and all that. And I'm just here like, Mom, why aren't you saying anything? My dad decides that he wants to strike a deal with me. He's saying that my youngest brother, at the time his name was Maureen, so he said, like, they're trying to build a case around Maureen, but nothing ever happened. And I asked my brother if anything had happened, and he said no. And so I'm here like, okay, my dad's going to be in trouble for things that he didn't do, and I'm the only victim, and my other brother hates me. And so my dad wants to strike a deal that if I tell the cops and tell CPS that I dreamt everything up, then he'll get me my own apartment. Now, mind you, my dad was an engineer. He made over 150K, but the thing is, like, what was crazy is that he spent so much that we were still living paycheck to paycheck. But I was convinced that maybe he did have enough money to get me an apartment of my own. So I took the deal. I called the cops, I called CPS, and I told them to call it off, that I just dreamt everything up. Because I didn't want to be a burden to my family. I didn't want them to struggle financially, and I didn't want it to all break down just because of me. And that was the choice I made. I resolved to just moving out of my family's home a day after I graduated. So I lived with my abuser for even more years, and then left. I was just at my breaking point. I was in and out of psych wards because it was just so incredibly exhausting and stressful. I left home. I moved to the UK in Liverpool with my ex, my former boyfriend, I suppose, at the time. I stayed there for 6 months. Then I moved to Australia, where I lived for about a year. Towards the end of my stay in Australia, I got into like a really petty fight with my middle brother. And I can't remember what it was about, but I ended up going on Twitter and venting about how my brother wasn't there for me when I needed him, how my whole family wasn't there when I needed them because I was a victim and nobody cared. My youngest brother saw the tweets and he messaged me to tell me that he owed a lot to me. And I was really confused. I'm like, what are you talking about? And it turned out that for a solid year, every night, my brother at 9 years old was being molested by my dad. And it only stopped when I reported him to CPS. That was the only reason it stopped. And so my youngest brother was thanking me for making it stop. And I was just so full of rage. So angry. If I could go back in time, I wouldn't have called off the cops. I wouldn't have called off CPS. I would have just let him get in trouble, because that's what he deserved. My brother and I didn't deserve that. Anyway, it turned out that my tita, my aunt, had Twitter and she saw my post. I didn't even know she was following me, and she messaged me, "Monina, we need to talk." And I thought, what did I do? And it turned out my dad molested her when she was around 17 years old, before my parents even got married. That blew my mind. And also from my tita, I learned that my cousin on my mom's side was also molested by my dad when she was about 10 years old, also before my parents got married. At that point, I am absolutely fuming, because not only was I hurt, my brother hurt, my aunt hurt, it's also my cousin. Like, there were so many people. All of us were victims of my dad. Yeah, that was a lot to recount. So let's just let this be a part 1, and next week I'll bring part 2 over for you. Just know that it gets better for me. If you'd like to support my channel, please feel free to give this video a like and to subscribe. And if you enjoy spilling tea, share the video. Share it. If you made it this far in the video, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you next week with part 2.